It is a pleasure to meet you again and to discuss such an important topic like 5G technology and to know more information about the implementation, about the important steps that have been taken in this direction. We know that you have a vast experience. You serve as a director at the European Commission and the various positions, including telecommunications, cyber security, and internet government. What is the status of 5G technology implementation in Europe? Where we are?
When you talk about 5G, I always stress that you should look at the spectrum and antennas. So this demystifies a little bit what 5G is, because many people talk about 5G as a revolution, something that will change the industry and so on and so forth. There's something in it, but let's take it step by step. First, spectrum. You need new spectrum to have 5G. And in Europe, we have the so-called C-band. This is worldwide actually for 5G. We also have the 700 megahertz and then a millimeter wave. So these are properties of the spectrum, which gives 5G the power. So this is important to understand. Without spectrum, you won't have 5G. Now, when you look at the spectrum allocation in Europe, only 1/3 of the spectrum has been assigned for 5G purposes. So we are way, let's say, behind the schedule the Commission decided to follow in 2016. So this is the first step. So we need to accelerate the allocation of spectrum. So we are behind also other regions in the world. The second part is antennas. So when you read, for instance, that certain operators have switched on 5G and then there's commercial availability of 5G everywhere, amongst others, you hear this where I live in Belgium. Well, the reality is you really don't have 5G commercial services in Belgium. Why is that? Because one operator uses existing spectrum that he has in order to offer some sort of 5G services. Now, in order to really have 5G, you need new antennas, the so-called massive MIMO antennas. So only when an operator deploys those antennas, we can really talk about real 5G. And we are here way behind the developments in Asia. So for instance, China has, until the end of last year, developed 700,000 base stations, which means 2.1 million antennas. So one base station normally has three antennas. And so they are developing much faster, also Japan and also South Korea, than Europe. So the situation in Europe is not dire, it's not bad, but we are definitely not developing according to our ambitions.
How are the 5G laws implemented in other countries?
Most of the time they follow the so-called recommendations from the European Commission, which is good. But on the other hand, the implementation or what it actually means is really uncertain almost everywhere. So we really have a problem that operators do not really understand what will be the final decision of the regulator, because the law normally allows the regulator to say, okay, we don't trust this vendor, so don't buy. It is a kind of a little bit in the air. So for investment, it is really not a good situation, because you need to understand that for 5G to become a driver for industrial transformation, you need additional investment, not only by the operator. The operator, for instance, needs to further upgrade their network. So what we have currently is not enough for industrial applications, but also the industry or smart cities needs to invest in what is called edge networks and into development of applications. And those applications must be better what you already have by using NB-IoT or 4G or other mobile technologies. There's a huge task ahead of us in order to develop 5G in a way that it fulfills the promises, and therefore the implementation of the regulation currently is rather, I wouldn't call it an obstacle, but it's not adding to the speed that we need. There's concern about national security, but when you don't have industrial applications, then 5G is more or less a better 4G.
What do you think about Romania and the steps taken in this direction?
Well, in Romania, the allocation or the assignment of spectrum is also lagging behind. I think in 2021, this year, Romania will accelerate and auction some significant part of available spectrum. This is the good news. And I think this should be the focus point. Make a spectrum available, because 5G is about spectrum and antennas. I can only repeat this again and again. It is not a mystery. It is about really clever technology in antennas and using spectrum. So you need spectrum, first of all. Then regarding the, let's say, the authorization schemes, and also making sure that 5G is secure or safe, Romania is, let's say, following more or less all the other countries, but in terms of the draft law, I think it needs a serious review and a discussion, a debate in a forum, so that all industry participants and experts can contribute to this. In general, the security aspects are important, but as I said, these are not the only aspects. And when you look at security, it would be wrong to focus on the vendor, and it would be wrong to focus on the network. You need to have the whole ecosystem, and securing the applications that run on 5G is much more important than talking about whether a vendor is influenced by a foreign government.
Is there any best practice example in European Union that we could follow?
Well, I mean, the discussion in Germany was quite revealing, because it was relatively transparent. The information security offices came in, the regulator came in, there was a debate in the parliament, and the different ministries had an exchange, and finally they came to a solution, which from a process point of view is probably a very good example. What we see also is in Spain, Portugal, also in Finland and Austria, a good example of a draft which is relatively clearly written. So I would look at Finland, Austria, Germany, and Spain to see how they have drafted their regulation, but also how the discussion and the process has developed. I think because it is much more important to see the ecosystem instead of just targeting and zooming in on 5G, which is for the next 3 to 5 years will be a consumer business and not an industry application.
What can you tell us about European Eastern?
European Eastern, yeah. In terms of assignment of spectrum, take Poland as an example, or Estonia, they are lagging behind. So I think, in particular now with the recovery fund, the European Recovery Fund, there is a unique opportunity to support the rollout of 5G across the Eastern European and Central European countries. I think this should be the priority, because, as I said, in terms of base stations that are really truly 5G enabled, which means antennas and not only a software upgrade that you see today. So if an operator says we have now 5G, when you look closer, very often you see a software upgrade of the base station. You always need to ask them, did you deploy the latest technology in terms of antennas? Because otherwise it's just a software upgrade and the communication will be just a little bit better. It will be better, yes, better than nothing, because 5G inherently is a better, let's say, protocol, it's a better technology. But the real boost comes if you deploy antennas in the radio access network. In general, also the European countries should focus also on development in the core network, because you see in the core network where all the intelligence is, where the network is being controlled, the billing and the cryptographic keys are stored. These networks are currently run on 4G networks. So this is quite interesting because you need a standalone 5G core network in order to develop all the features, low latency, massive IoT, and network slicing, where companies get their own networks, if you like. All of this needs a specific 5G core, which is not visible today. So again, we have a lot of investment and a lot of rollout to do. And the Eastern European countries could well use the funds that are now available in order to support this development.
Taking into consideration your history within the EU Commission, do you foresee any potential issues related to competition?
When you refer to competition that between countries or by excluding particular vendors, then this is indeed a very sensitive issue because it's driven, as we know, by geopolitics and not necessarily by, let's say, convincing technical arguments. So implementing the provisions that non-trustworthy, let's say, governments have an undue influence on certain vendors needs to be implemented. So simply by stating it, it's becoming a problem. So you need to find a way to attach some criteria. And those criteria are not easy to define and to measure. So they must be transparent and they must be effective, if you like. You cannot simply say, we don't trust. So in that sense, there is a conflict between taking decisions out of political considerations and trade issues, and also unfair, let's say, protectionism or competition. So favoring one company over the other. A better strategy would be, I mean, apart from really looking into any evidence, I think this is fair enough. But beyond this, one should really encourage operators for diversification, using multiple vendors for different aspects of the network. And of course, they need to manage this kind of implicit complexity that goes for it. But also for the governments to look beyond 5G networks, as I said, because 5G networks as such do not drive industrial transformation. The edge networks attached to those 5G networks and intelligent applications that run on those edge networks, these are the drivers of industrial transformation, not the 5G network in itself. If you look at the security aspect or national safety aspects, you look beyond the 5G.
In conclusion, do you envision Romania needs more debates on the topic?
You in Romania need, of course, you're closer to the discussion, but from where I stand, I can only encourage first a law like this to be broadly discussed with stakeholders in the country, and take your time, because it doesn't need to be decided overnight. So that's the first thing, is that a solid, deep debate is needed. Secondly, one should really also take the advantage of looking at other examples, as you indicated in your earlier question. And thirdly, I think a regulation like this needs to be notified to the Commission for transparency reasons. So this needs to be done as soon as possible, because you will get also feedback from the experts in the Commission, and this is valuable feedback that you have. And fourthly, as I said, do not focus exclusively on vendors and on the 5G network in itself. look at the whole ecosystem, look at the industrial applications, because there's a lot of work to be done. It is not given that 5G will be so superior to 4G and other technologies that it is an automatic success. You really need to work hard on this. And fifth, this is a good opportunity to use the available funds from the recovery fund, the European Recovery Fund. And last but not least, please press ahead with the assignment of spectrum, because 5G is about spectrum.
Thank you. Thank you for this information.
You're welcome.